All right, so we're just gonna jump into this, man. So the College Football Playoff Committee just dropped the top 25 rankings before Conference Championship weekend. I got some thoughts on it. We see it right here, right now. Off rip, the top five looks about right. Oregon, obviously undefeated. Texas, one loss. SEC, Penn State, one loss. Big Ten, Notre Dame, one loss. Now it's a bad loss, but it's only one loss. Georgia, two losses. Yeah, two losses. After that, Ohio State. Actually, let's go to the rankings. So Ohio State, they dropped 4 for losing to Michigan. Bad loss. Then we got Tennessee, SMU, Indiana, Boise State, Bama. Miami dropped 6 for losing to Syracuse, who, by the way, is in the top 25 now. Then we got Ole Miss, South Carolina, Arizona State, Iowa State, Clemson, and low-key, actually, UNLV, they're in contention for making the playoffs, right? If they win, if they beat Boise State. Just looking at it initially, I think Miami falling 6 spots and Ohio State falling 4 spots is a little bit crazy. Don't think that. I feel like Ohio State either should drop more or Miami should have dropped less. Now, if Miami drops less, they're ahead of Bama still. So, obviously, committee can't do that. And then, low-key, I think the biggest gripe I have with this whole thing is Missouri being ranked 19th. Now, if you look at Missouri, anyone who's watched them knows they just have not looked great all year. Barely snuck by teams, got blown out by Bama and Texas A&M. South Carolina, though, they lose the South Carolina game. They were ranked 23rd at the time. Lose to South Carolina, they're ranked 23rd the week after. Now, at the time, people are seeing it. They're not really thinking much of it. Oh, Missouri ended the rankings. Doesn't really mean anything. But what it does is it now gives Alabama that extra top 25 win, as opposed to instead of being 2-1, now they're 3-1, which Miami is 0-1 against top 25 teams. Except when we look at the AP poll, Louisville and Duke, who Miami beat, are about 27th and 28th, or 27th, 28th. So essentially, what you're saying is this team being at 19, who hasn't looked that great, makes a world of difference over beating Louisville and Duke, who are both probably at a similar caliber, right? Like, they're probably similar teams. Like, 25 is just a very arbitrary point to cut it off. I definitely feel like there should be more of... I think we should just rank the entire country at this point. Like, rank the entire country so that way, beating the 26th best team doesn't hold you back as opposed to beating the 25th best team, if that makes sense. So other than that, let's see. We got this weekend, who do we got playing? So we got Oregon, Penn State playing, Texas, Georgia playing, SMU and Clemson playing. Now, what's interesting about SMU and Clemson playing is SMU right now, they are the 8th best team in the country, ranked 8th, right? If they lose, what are the odds that they fall all the way behind Bama? Now, that's an interesting question. I think SMU, as long as they don't get blown out, they're safe. Even if they get blown out, they should be in, because right now what the committee's saying is, at this point in time, SMU is a playoff team. They have to play one more game. In playing that game, they could not be a playoff team, whereas Bama doesn't have to play any more games and is still a playoff team, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me. It doesn't make a ton of sense to me. I think either way, SMU should be safe. Then, low-key, Arizona State, Iowa State, that should be interesting. I think the biggest winner in all this, depending on how the game goes, could be Penn State. Being that 5 seed, bro, that 5 seed is really, really kind of looks like the best slot here, because you're Penn State, you beat Arizona State, you play Boise State, you win that, you're in the semifinals. Like, I'm not saying it's a cakewalk. Obviously, you got to play the game. But I definitely think that this is the slot you want to be in, because Ohio State, whoever they have to play, whoever Ohio State has to play, they winner that got to play Oregon, and I think Ohio State's probably going to have to play, looks like Tennessee, maybe? Yeah, I think it's Tennessee. Notre Dame, I think, gets Indiana, and then Georgia would get Bama. Yeah, okay, yeah, so that could Yeah, that's a gauntlet right there. Penn State definitely walking through, definitely what you want to, where you would want to be. Um, how do y'all feel about? And let me know how y'all feel about Ole Miss, South Carolina, where Bama's ranked. I think that. So I'm a big fan of head-to-head mattering, right? I think head-to-head games that should dictate a lot. So off rip, South Carolina, even though they're playing well, even though some of the metrics say they've done better, they lost to Ole Miss, lost to Bama, got to drop them. So then it's really Bama, Miami, Ole Miss. Let's just go to these teams, let's see what they got going for them. So I think Ole Miss, one, I just want to get this out the way too. I have no sympathy for any. I said when there were 4 teams, right? Like, okay, you're probably going to have a couple one-loss teams ranked 5th. Florida State's case, an undefeated team ranked 5th, be out of the playoff. I have sympathy for that. You lose 3 games, I ain't gonna lie. Sympathy gone out the window. You should have won more games. Now at this point, whatever the committee does, they do. I still think the process the committee goes with is a little bit shaky. I think it's just not even shaky. It's just not consistent across the board, right? Like they'll rank Team A over Team B because of criteria C, but then they'll rank Team E over Team F because like criteria G, but Team F has a better criteria C than Team E. Like it's just a lot of circular arguments, right? But all right, Miami lost 2 of their last 3. Now, if one of their last 3 was Mercer, I think their schedule looks a little bit different, right? So obviously when you lose, they say it doesn't matter, but it 100% matters, because if this had been a loss in this week, not saying to this team, but say they lose a ranked game this week, you have a lot of time to come back. Like Bama, they lost to Vanderbilt October 5th. It feels like they're not getting punished for that loss at all. But Miami, so Louisville, I think Louisville could be ranked. Duke probably should be ranked. So that would put them at 2-1 over top 25 teams, right? Looks a lot different than 3-1, which Bama gets that one because Missouri, who isn't that good, they beat, and shouldn't be ranked. And then, so they barely got by South Carolina, lost to Vanderbilt, looked bad against Tennessee, got blown out by Oklahoma. Like, this is what I'm saying. Like, just the criteria they use, because I feel like the losses, too, losses are pretty bad for Bama. They're bad. I think they're bad for Miami, maybe not as bad. Like, Georgia Tech just took Georgia to the 8 overtimes. I think, I don't think the committee really looks at how the games were played, because if so, it's like, all right, barely lost to Georgia Tech, who probably should have beat Georgia. Refs pretty piss poor in that game. They, if Georgia Tech beats Georgia, now it's not even that bad of a loss. Ole Miss, on the other hand, Kentucky, definitely an awful loss. Definitely terrible. Florida's been playing much better, but even still, common opponents, which I get that Florida had a change in quarterback, has been playing much better, but Miami beat the brakes off of Florida. Ole Miss lost to them. Now, if you want to say that you have to look at how a team's improved over the course of the year, then that's when I think, okay, South Carolina comes into the picture, where South Carolina started off kind of shaky. Now, I will say, this loss to LSU, if y'all watch that game, terrible job by the refs. Refs absolutely hosed them. So if this is a win, now like South Carolina's in all of a sudden, even though they have losses to Ole Miss and Bama. Then even looking at Ole Miss and Bama, right? Ole Miss beat the brakes off them. Bama barely squeaked by. It's what I'm saying. It's just not a lot of like uniformity across the board in terms of how they're applying the criteria, in my opinion, at least. And then my biggest issue with kind of just the whole rankings is how we come up with conclusions, right? So actually, I saw it on Twitter. Essentially, how it went was so the reason that the SEC, it's such a difficult league to play in is because, if you beat a team, it was a good team you beat. If you lose to a team, you lost to a good team. That would have run the table in another conference, right? So if we look at Texas, no real great wins, right? But they beat Georgia. So we look at Georgia. Who Georgia beat? Well, they lost to Bama. They beat Texas. They lost to Ole Miss. Georgia beat Tennessee. So obviously Georgia beating Texas, right? It's not a bad loss for Texas. It's a good win. But Texas hasn't beat anyone. Texas's best win is probably, who do we call it? Vanderbilt, Michigan, Texas A&M, I guess. So Georgia gets a ton of credit for beating Texas, right? Who, based on what they've done on the field, we can't just definitively say Texas is this juggernaut, right? And then Tennessee. So Tennessee, they lost to Georgia, but they beat Alabama. So obviously Tennessee has to be good because they beat Bama. So now we look at Bama. Bama, well, they beat Georgia, so they have to be good. But Georgia's only good because they beat Texas, who's only good because they lost to Georgia, who beat Texas. So you guys kind of see what I'm getting at? Like, you kind of just make this circular argument of the SEC teams are good because they beat each other, and they're not as bad as you think for their losses because they lost to each other. Doesn't make a ton of sense. Doesn't make a ton of sense. I've been saying this for years now that I don't think the SEC is that great top to bottom. I think it is a very top-heavy conference. And this year, without having that kind of elite juggernaut team that we've seen in years past with Bama and Georgia, LSU in 2019, I think it kind of shows how it's just that foundation that theory's built on, a little bit shaky. So here it is. Here's the tweet. But, all right, so Oklahoma and Vandy 7-1 out of conference and face the SEC schedule of teams that 135 and 57. All right, so Oklahoma and Vandy probably played, a lot of the good teams in the conference. BYU's conference opponents were 51 and 57. Kansas 1-2 out of conference, 73-35 Big 12 schedule. AZ State 3-0 out of conference, 52-56 Big 12 schedule. Vandy lost to a 3-9 Sun Belt team. Bama also beat 10-2 Georgia. Georgia sucks, but Georgia beat 11-1 Texas, so obviously they don't suck. Texas is good because their only loss came to Georgia, who's good because they lost to Bama and beat Texas. But Bama's good because they beat Georgia and South Carolina. But South Carolina's good because their losses are only to a kind of bullshit loss to LSU and lost to Ole Miss and Bama, who are good because they beat South Carolina. And you see what I'm saying? Like, you can just keep going in a circle with it. But the teams are good because they beat each other. They're not bad because they lost to each other. So I think that, looking at the playoff, looking at how everything looks, I don't know. I think there needs to be a better criteria for how we go about it. But I think at the end of the day, it is what it is. Teams that are 11, 12, 13, 14, multiple losses, had multiple opportunities on the field to, stake your claim. Like, who's not worried? Oregon. You know why? 12-0. So win your games. You don't got to worry about this. I just think the committee will never shake the SEC bias allegations. And this whole thing was actually live. I forgot to mention this on the live stream, but SMU right now is ranked 8th. I said they should be in a good spot, but if by chance they do lose and drop behind Bama, I think that essentially destroys conference championships. I don't see why anyone would ever play in them. Like I said, right now the committee's saying SMU is in the playoff. Dropping them would say you play an extra game, someone else not playing an extra game, it's going to be held against you. So, yeah, I think the committee is going to be real interesting to see what happens if SMU does lose. Now, 2 years ago, TCU did lose and ended up still in the playoffs over Bama. I think that should be the case here, but I guess we will have to see.